This era killed Cartoon Network. And I'm not just saying that for dramatic effect, because I genuinely mean it when I say that the fall era played a hand in the eventual death of the network. And that's disappointing to say when Cartoon Network was coming off of some of its hottest eras that it had to offer. Eras that many people, including myself, hold near and dear to their hearts. Except for that last era. But why exactly do I see this era as the one to put the final nail in the coffin for Cartoon Network? What were the bumpers, shows, and overall direction that the era had to offer? And who the heck is this dude? Like, for real. Who is he? What's his purpose? And just why? Well, we're about to unravel the era that killed Cartoon Network. Cartoon Network's fall era aired on September 14th, 2007, and would be the network's 7th official era. This era here is actually rather an interesting case. I say that because many people have different opinions as to which era truly sparked Cartoon Network's decline. Some say this era sparked it, some say the 2010s, some say Cartoon Network in its current state. But thinking theoretically, the only logical answer that I can come up with is the era that came before this one, the Yes era. If the Powerhouse and CN City era was Cartoon Network's proverbial peak of the mountain and there was no topping that, then naturally the Yes era would be Cartoon Network falling off of that mountain. So going into the fall era, the network was either going to peak again or fall to its death. And I find it no coincidence that this era would be aptly named the fall. Now, you may be like, but Murray, the era didn't get its name from the network's steep decline in popularity. It got its name from the season that it's in. Well, duh. Obviously, this era will get its name for its seasonal change, being that Cartoon Network was leaving the summer season and had to adapt to the new school year that kids were entering. Aesthetically, from what can be seen, the network was going for a more urban look. There are shots of buildings, streets, a park. Everything is covered in graffiti, including the CN logo. It almost feels like a callback to the look that CN City had. The now, next, and later bumpers featured headshots of cartoon characters in these brown, tan, blue, and red color palettes. You got kids in the bumpers dancing, doing activities. There's some rock music playing in the background as well. Cartoon Network is hitting home that this era is supposed to be fun regardless of school being back. And I absolutely love that. I love the fact that kids are at the forefront of these bumpers, considering that's exactly who's watching your product. I even love how some of the bumpers show the process of what it's like being a kid going to school and then coming home to watch cartoons. These bumpers also seem to work as their sign-off ones. From how I look at it, it definitely feels like Cartoon Network was trying to grow up with the viewer, assuming that this is the same audience that grew up watching the Powerhouse or CN City era as a kid. The artistic style definitely feels like a callback, but also at the same time feels more modernized and more teen-esque. So looking at everything so far from an artistic standpoint, Shiloh Designs really seems to know what they're doing with these bumpers. But who is this dude?
They say now it's time for us to go back to school.
So for those of you that don't know, this man right here is named Wait. What's his name?
Almqvist.
Okay guys, I got it now. It's pronounced Full Metal Alchemist. Got you. So apparently he's the lead singer of a band called The Hives, whom I haven't heard since I last watched this era when I was little, but that's just me. And the music that the kids are dancing to is actually their song named, and I kid you not, this is the actual name to a song.
Something that grown-ups invented.
Not the worst song name that I've heard, but if you really think about it, it really doesn't sound like a song name. It sounds more like a conspiracy theory. All jokes aside, there's actually a fair amount of people who like this band growing up, and to each their own. But I think my problem isn't so much with the band itself. Cartoon Network decided to have the Hives essentially be the flag bearers for the fall era, featuring them and their music in most of the bumpers, which immediately has me going,
What the What?
We go from the cartoon squad leading the Starburst era, a whole community of characters leading CN City, Fredburger failing to lead the Yes era. We go from all of that to real people? That feels wrong on so many levels. But you know what doesn't feel wrong? My subscribers who signed up to be a Murray member. Huge shout out to my Murray members. Thank you so much for your support. When I look at the hives, I don't get the sense that I'm looking at a channel that is trying to meet the slogan that it wants to live by.
Cartoon Network, the best place for cartoons.
I understand that Cartoon Network was going for the whole punk rock, kids rule, parents drool type of vibe, but it feels wrong to not have any cartoon characters leading the era. Why aren't the OG characters at least being shown dancing and doing activities with the children? Why aren't the kids from Class of 3000 or Andre himself singing in these bumpers? The bumpers are music related after all. Well, the reasons may be more grim than you think, and I'm not talking about Billy and Mandy. For some of the fan favorite shows that carried the network through the Yes era, they would see their eventual end during this one. Codenamed Kids Next Door, Camp Lazlo, the original Ben 10, Squirrel Boy, and Class of 3000. For the OG shows that were with the network since the beginning, they had already seen their end and either transferred over to the top 5 block or the revamped Cartoon Show, essentially creating a mass departure of big time original programming for the fall era itself. You know, the best way that I can illustrate it to you, it kind of feels like that one scene from Mr. Incredibles where Mr. Incredible is going over the database, you know, and you just see one superhero after the other being eliminated. Well, picture that, but with cartoons. That's essentially how I feel about this era. With the old cartoons out of the picture, what would be the next lineup of cartoons to take their places? Well, Ed, Edd and Eddy would still remain running, along with Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and My Gym Partner's a Monkey. However, the new cartoons will consist of Ben 10 Alien Force, Transformers Animated, The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, and Chowder. Other shows like Johnny Test, Shaolin Showdown, and Total Drama Island would be added to the mix as well, but aired on other networks like WB Kids, the CW, and Teletoon before reaching the US version of Cartoon Network. So these shows will be considered acquired, not original. Outside of the 4 original shows, there really wasn't much to offer in new, fresh, original content compared to the other eras prior. However, we all know how beloved Chowder and Flapjack were going to become for Cartoon Network. Now, outside of my criticisms of the hives and lack of blockbuster programming, what really about this era tops it off for me as the worst? Well, when I look at the direction that this era decided to take, I can't help but look at the person who was in charge of it at the time, Stuart Snyder, the president of Cartoon Network during the fall era. And this is what you need to know about Stuart Snyder. After Jim Samples voluntarily stepped down as president of Cartoon Network due to a failed marketing stunt that led to a bomb scare,
this little creature that lights up in the dark and makes an obscene gesture is on his website. It was also found over the entryway to a comic book store in Alston.
Stuart Snyder would be next in line to take the lead of the network. Beforehand, from 2000 to 2001, Stuart Snyder served as COO and president of a professional wrestling company formerly known as World Wrestling Federation, now known as World Wrestling Entertainment, which I actually happen to be a big fan of. Now, there's not really much information that's known about Stuart prior to leading Cartoon Network outside of a professional wrestling podcast that is run by Jim Ross, a pro wrestling commentator that is highly regarded in the pro wrestling world. He had this to say about Stuart Snyder.
Stu had no product knowledge, running a wrestling company that was trying to become more. And I think Stu had done something with Cartoon Network, and I didn't have a great rapport with him. I just see him a lot. And I remember him having an issue. And I think when Vince found this out, it was the beginning of the end. Stu did not want to ride in a black limousine, and he sure as hell didn't want a black driver. And when Vince found out that he only wanted white limousines and white drivers, as I remember it, that was the nails started being driven in the coffin. Thinking he was comparing wrestlers to cartoon characters, and it's just, they're real humans with real feelings.
So take what you will from the limo driver incident, that's a problem in of itself, but that actually isn't my biggest concern. My biggest concern is you had someone serve as president of a professional wrestling company that had no valuable knowledge on how to run the product, transfer over to a network that aired cartoons and seemingly had no knowledge on how to run that either. His lack of knowledge on how to run a network and satisfy the fans showed with the Fall era. It showed with the type of programming that was being aired, and it showed with the presentation of the bumpers. And I actually find it funny that Jim Ross said that Stu compared the wrestlers to cartoon characters. It's almost like it was foreshadowing what was to come. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, under Stuart Snyder's leadership, it would become quite evident that the network wanted to fully tap into a completely different market. And this is where I truly feel the era starts to fall into an abyss. And in that abyss lives a hideous monster that simply goes by 2 words. To spearhead this new direction in programming, a live-action animated series known as Out of Jimmy's Head would premiere on the same day that the era was launched. Out of Jimmy's Head would premiere season 1, which consisted of 20 episodes. The show would air regularly during the Friday Dynamite block that aired other live-action shows such as Goosebumps and Ben 10: Race Against Time. Just as it seemed that season 2 was in production, there would be several factors that worked against it. The Writers Guild of America 2007, and the sheer amount of negative reviews and ratings that it had received. With everything seemingly snowballing against the show, there was no chance that Cartoon Network would be able to revive it, and so they had no choice but to cancel it altogether. When I tell you that this would be one of Cartoon Network's biggest blunders in history, that might be an understatement. The show received so much negativity that Cartoon Network themselves would erase the show from all media platforms, including their own, which put the show as a whole into the category of lost media. It almost feels like Cartoon Network tried to pull a Men in Black on us and think everyone would just forget that they just threw everybody under the bus. But that's not how it works. You can't just throw a rock and hide your hand afterwards. But for what it's worth, there is a dedicated YouTube channel known as Out of Jimmy's Head Archive that has found most of the full episodes, bumpers, and promos from the show. Link will be in the description. But for as short-lived as Out of Jimmy's Head would be, the Fall era would see its end shortly after. Being defunct on July 13th, 2008, the Fall era wouldn't even last a year and would be succeeded by the fan favorite Nudes era. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some pretty cool creative ideas about this era that I talked about, but with things like a live action band serving as the poster children for the bumpers, a poor amount of new original shows, the debacle that was Out of Jimmy's Head, and the sketchy history and poor leadership from Stuart Snyder, those little victories that this era may have had were completely overshadowed by these big mistakes. This certainly isn't the same Cartoon Network that I fell in love with. The Fall era officially gives the Cartoon Network era record a 3-2. 4-2 if you're counting the Starburst era. But with Cartoon Network's new focus on live action, they would fail to stop the bleeding that the Yes era caused, ultimately hitting the fatal blow with this era. But with all things that die, there is a chance that they can be revived. With the Nudes era on the horizon, would it be able to bring back Cartoon Network from the dead and back into prominence? We'll just have to see in the next era retrospective. But make no mistake about it, the Fall is the era that truly killed Cartoon Network.